Welcome, everybody who is tuning into this podcast, either visually or in audio format. This is the Praecepta Podcast. Praecepta is the new music student organization at Bowling Green State University. I'm Stephen Naylor. I am finishing up my undergrad here at BGSU right now, studying piano performance and music composition. And my co-host is Connor Scroggins. Connor.
Hi, I'm Connor. I'm a second year grad student here at BGSU, and I'm studying for Master of Music and Composition. Um, Wrapping that up real soon. Today we have our special guest for our podcast, Marina Kifferstein. She presented online at BGSU about a week ago, I believe, and we were super excited to have her then. We're super excited to have her here. Um, Wonderful composer, performer, violinist. She's doing lots of wonderful things for new music. Co-founder of Rhythm Method String Quartet and the Tack Ensemble. Just look her up on YouTube. You'll find lots of premieres performances by her. Go check out her website. She's got lots of things planned. So to go ahead and get things started, I'd like to ask you, Marina, some about your background, like where you got your start in music, in performing on violin and composition. Lots of different directions we can go. So take it away.
Sure. So yeah, I guess I started playing violin when I was 3 years old, in a Suzuki program. I just happened uh I happened to live walking distance to like the flagship Suzuki school in the United States. One of the perks of growing up in Midtown Manhattan. um, yeah, so I was just really drawn to the instrument. My parents tell me that when I was 2, I was already like begging them to play the violin. I saw Sesame Street and it's Zuck Perlman played on Sesame Street, and I was just like, oh,
Oh yeah.
that's it. That's what I got to do. Um, but I didn't really know what it meant to be a professional musician until I was quite a bit older. I mean, honestly, I don't think I fully knew what that could mean until I was already in a conservatory program. I did my undergraduate at Oberlin, and I did a dual degree in violin and English with creative writing concentration. I just wanted to keep reading books. And I knew that I probably wouldn't uh, make enough time for fiction if that wasn't my major in the college. So yeah, and then I sometime in my sophomore year at Oberlin, I made the decision that I wanted to really give it a go to be a professional performer. And before that, I think I didn't really know what that would mean, and I couldn't really imagine that because I didn't have a ton of models in my immediate close circle who were full-time musicians. Although I did have a lot of full-time performing artists in my life because I grew up in artist housing. So my mom was a dancer, but by the time she had me, by the time I have memories, she was working in arts administration and um, dance administration. And my next door neighbor he still lives in that same apartment across from my parents. He's an amazing visual artist, Greg Russell, if anybody wants to check him out. And my best friend's parents were actors, still are actors. So that there was a lot of artsiness going on in my world, but I didn't really know what it would look like for me to be a professional musician. And I never really had a strong interest in being a full-time orchestral player. I really like playing in orchestra, but it just I never felt that I was passionate enough to make it worth how strenuous and intense the audition process is. It was kind of like, well, that's a stable job in music, but if I'm going to do music, then I might as well do the music that I want to do, because none of it is stable and none of it is guaranteed. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up getting more into contemporary music. I did my master's at Manhattan School of Music in the contemporary performance program, which is where I met the other members of Talk Ensemble. We started Talk out of that program, and then I also, my quartet members, actually everybody who's currently in the quartet went through that program as well. But that's kind of a coincidence, because we didn't. Well, it's not exactly a coincidence. I think, a lot of people who end up in New York who are really into contemporary music, there's like a good um, pretty good chunk of us who went through that program at some point or another. But yeah, so my, the rhythm method kind of came about right at the end of my master's as well. Took off, I think 4 years from school, and then I decided I wanted to go back for a doctorate, and ended up at the grad center, CUNY Grad Center, and I'm working on my dissertation now, so that's kind of a little behind schedule because of the pandemic, but it's happening. So that's kind of my educational background, I guess.
It's always interesting to hear the stories about musicians where they didn't know when they were younger, like, yes, I'm going to be a musician. It was something that sort of like logically grew out of like they were already like well into their education, and it was finally like, yeah, I think I want to go this route.
Yeah. Well, I think I have, this is like a personality trait of mine, I've come to realize, and maybe this is a better conversation for therapy, but that I really like, I have a hard time closing the door on things until I'm absolutely sure that it's not for me, or that something else is for me. And it's, so I think with music, I never wanted to close the door on it. I always wanted, growing up, it was like I always wanted to be as, it was an important part of my life, and I wanted to take it seriously, and I never wanted to quit. I always wanted to be getting better and practicing, and it wasn't because I knew that I wanted to do it, but it was more because I didn't know that I didn't want to do it, if that makes sense. And I, and also, growing up, I was doing like 1,000 extracurricular activities, but just because like New York City, I don't know if y'all have any experience with like if you've lived in New York, or if you know people who grew up in New York, but it's like a very fast-paced place for kids. All the kids I know who grew up in New York were like scheduled all day. And part of that's maybe because we can't really like play outside. So we have to do other stuff. But yeah, so part of it is that, and then also, it was just a big part of my identity from when I was a little kid. It was just, I had such a big community in my music school, and yeah, my relationships with my teachers were so important to me.
It was interesting hearing that your undergrad, you also did creative writing. And later on, I think that the creative aspect morphed into a more musical thing because you're also a composer. Where sort of in that trajectory did you start experimenting with composition or other ways of being musically creative?
So I actually started composing in high school. I had a few pieces that I wrote, they were like, I wrote a piano piece for a friend of mine that is like, it was like one of those clearly written for MIDI kind of. Like, does this fall well in a real human's hands? I don't know. But I wrote a piano piece, and I wrote a few piano pieces. I wrote a string quartet. I wrote a kind of larger ensemble piece that was only ever gonna be played on my computer, and I had a handful, maybe I wrote like 10 pieces or something in high school, and then I just didn't get the same kind of positive reinforcement about composing as I did with playing violin. I think I was just like already at that point more advanced of a violinist. And so I would, I felt that I was kind of like better at it. I was thinking about applying to conservatory with composition actually, and I didn't end up doing it. I never actually took composition lessons until I've only ever taken a handful of composition lessons. I haven't really studied composition formally, but I've studied so many compositions through performing them. I really
exactly.
studied a lot of new music, but I just I haven't really like worked with a composition mentor in the way that people do when they go to a conservatory program, or even a summer festival. I studied briefly with Reiko Futing at Manhattan School. We had a few lessons, and that was really great for me. I wish I'd done more, but it was just kind of one semester. But I stopped writing for my entire undergrad, basically. I mean, I would write sketches pretty often, actually. I would like come up with something, and then I wouldn't develop it, and I wouldn't finish it, and it would just kind of sit somewhere, and I wouldn't show it to anybody. And most of that was just like violin music, just as I was practicing, like, oh, that sounds cool, or oh, I'm inspired by the Bartok solo sonata, I'm going to write something kind of like that. Or I would kind of I would have little fits of inspiration and write out something and then put it in the closet. But then I started writing again. The first piece that I wrote that was performed in a professional context was in my second year of master's. So that was in 2014, I believe. That was when I resurfaced as a composer after many years. And, I think one of the reasons that I stopped writing for that whole time was because I felt that I was going, when I was at Oberlin, there was this really long stretch of time when I was just like bombarded with information. I mean, I just was learning so much. I was like, oh my gosh, like Xenakis exists, Lachenmann exists, like what are all these things? And just like having all of these, just kind of even Ligeti, like I hadn't learned, like there was, when I was in high school, like the most contemporary music that I ever played was like Shostakovich or Prokofiev, and so then I got to college and I was like, wow, there is a lot of stuff out there that's doing all kinds of stuff that like I don't even understand, and I love that, and like I want to get it, like I want to understand it. So that it really drew me in that way. Just kind of like I would listen to something and be like, I have no idea how I'm even supposed to listen to this. And that was really exciting to me. And my kind of entry point into contemporary music was through the Bang on a Can festival, which, the Bang on a Can, the music that they program like tends to be a bit more like groovy and tonal and like pop aesthetic, almost like a lot of electric guitar, drum kit, that kind of stuff. Not exclusively, but that's like a lot of what they do. And I was like also really enthralled by that. I was like, oh my gosh, like new music can be like Julia Wolf, or like it can be Rebecca Saunders. And I'm like what? There's like so different, and they're both kind of in this universe that so I was just kind of like, okay, I need to learn about what exists, and then once I feel like I kind of have a grasp on what exists, then I can start to feel like I have something to say that isn't going to just be like reductive or really basic or whatever. I don't know what I was worried about. Which now that I'm looking back, I'm like, I still don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. You're always finding cool, new, inspiring stuff. I've learned in the time since I started composing publicly, I've learned about probably like thousands of new composers whose work I really admire, so at least hundreds. So I don't think that it's like you need to know everything before you can produce anything meaningful. I'm not trying to say that, but that was how I felt at the time, was that I didn't know enough to contribute to a discourse that I didn't even, I didn't even know there was a discourse.
I get that. As somebody else who was like writing tiny little fragments of things that never really got completed in high school, it's like growing up as a pianist, Chopin is your world, until you find out about other composers. And so then you find out about everything else, and then it accumulates. And
Yeah.
The information that you put out in your own work, it has traces of everything that you've learned along the way.
And now my compositional practice is much more interconnected with my improvisational practice, which is also something that I've been developing over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so. And especially actually over the pandemic, I went very hardcore into improvisation because I didn't want to do anything else. I just didn't I didn't have any concerts. There was no there it didn't feel like there was any reason to learn music that I didn't even have a concert date for, so which I know everybody kind of reacted differently to that like initial drop off of everything. But for me, I was just kind of like, all I want when I'm practicing is like, I want to be like having catharsis all the time. And that's kind of how I feel about violin playing a lot of the time. It's just like a practice and catharsis. It's just like uh, I get a lot of anxiety when I don't play violin for a few days in a row, and I'm not sure whether it's because I feel like I should be practicing and I'm beating myself up, or because I missed that kind of like release. I wasn't getting that from I was just getting sad when I was trying to learn new music. I did it. I was taking actually my violin teacher at the grad center, Mark Steinberg, was extremely extremely generous with his time in the early days of the pandemic, especially. He, we kept meeting for Zoom lessons all the way through the summer. That first year. And so I would have something to prepare for, I had to, but I always felt very unprepared for the lessons because I had all this time. I had nothing but time, and I just like couldn't bring myself to, I don't know, practice certain kinds of music. It just like felt pointless or something, which it doesn't feel that way anymore. I have since in the last 2 years gotten better at practicing music that I will never, or that I don't know when I will perform. And I've learned some pieces that I have yet to perform. Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of improvisation practice, and just learning more about improvisation from different traditions, and yeah, just all of that has been super inspiring, and being kind of more of a part of a community of people who are improvising and coming from different backgrounds and meeting somewhere in this kind of shared communicative space has been really, it's been really impactful on my compositional practice as well.
Excellent. When you presented last week, you shared your insight into alternate pitch harmonic systems, especially like with Marianne Amiche and Irv Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really curious. You've shared a lot about your background, and I'm curious to know where did your interest in that take root?
So for 3 years, I think 3 years, I was fortunate to have like the best roommate in the world, who is Austin Wolleman from the Jack Quartet. Um, and we were buddies, and he started, Jack Quartet was really deep into the JI universe, just intonation universe. And I had already at that point heard some stuff tuned in just intonation, and I was like, this is interesting. I have no idea like how it works. It was another one of those kinds, just kind of like when I first got into contemporary music, my access point was being like, what? uh, cool. Like that's basically like how I get into things. I'm just like perplexed and intrigued. And then I kind of go down a rabbit hole a lot of the time. And so that was what happened with just intonation. And Austin and I would just like hang out and like jam out on JI intervals and be like, yeah, can you find this difference tone, the combination tone? Can you like, let's do a test where we like figure out the math of what it should be, and you just practice that, and then you see if you can hear it. And it's just basically we're just doing like ear training, and it was just like a fun evening hang activity, like, so because we're nerds, and that's that's what you do.
It's what you do. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just what you do. But and he really helped me by like really breaking down the math and like just like how to calculate all this stuff, and just breaking down the physical principles that are at play. And then from there, that's when I started composing with just intonation. And some of my earlier pieces with that, I was working mostly with intervals up to like the 11th partial or so. I wasn't going nuts. I mean, that already felt pretty nuts for me to like be able to hear that. And then, sometimes there would be like two different tonalities happening that were clashing and beating in interesting ways. But my second string quartet, which I actually just rehearsed earlier today with the rhythm method, we had our first rehearsal in a while because we have our cellist Megan has been on maternity leave for a few months, so we haven't been rehearsing, and she has two amazing twins.
Wow.
Yes. Liam and Noah, if you're out there listening in 5 years, or 3 years, I don't know, 1, 2 kids. Anyway.
Who knows these days?
When the kids listen to podcasts. Yeah, so we just had a rehearsal because we have an album coming out, and one of the pieces that we were rehearsing was my second quartet. And I think Megan actually asked me, she was like, which partial is this supposed to be? And I was like, let me consult my notes. And it was like, okay, so in this measure, you're like the 27th, this is the 28th, that's the 29th, that's the 30th or something. And like, or like in this next measure, it's like going up into the 50s or whatever, so it was like with that piece, I was really going way higher up in the series and getting some, building chords out of that. Yeah, my most recent piece, I guess, which I wrote, we performed it in September, I want to say. That's using this kind of just intonation tuning system, but I ended up being kind of a lot more intuitive and free with it. Like and there's a lot more improvisation in that piece. Although the second quartet has a lot of improvisation as well, I guess, actually. But it's a different kind of improvisation. In the new piece, which is called The Forest for the Trees, there's a lot more kind of exploration of different timbres, and it's kind of giving certain kinds of freedom to the performer that I've done before in different ways, but this was kind of the first time I was really blending. Well, maybe it's not. Now I keep thinking of counterexamples. I have a trombone quintet that has a lot of that's also in just intonation tuning, and has a lot of improvisation. I always have kind of improvised elements in my scores. I like to have scores where there's as little information on the page as possible to get across whatever I'm trying to get across, and where I can just trust the performers to like do something cool that feels good and sounds good. But within certain limitations. I forgot the question.
We were just discovering alternate
how
tuning
I got
systems we
into
talked about.
just intonation.
Yeah, that was a journey in itself. Quite like the deep dive that you go on as you discover more partials.
Exactly.
Yeah, on this talk of different tuning systems. Was it last semester, Connor, or was it really early this semester? No, it was last semester. The Ecmele's vocal ensemble came to BGSU, and Connor and I were lucky enough to chat with them, and they gave a fabulous concert, and they're just an incredible ensemble, and they work with a lot of microtonal vocal music. And of course, we ask, how do you manage to rehearse things like this? And some of it is just over time, you start to learn to hear certain intervals. Again, it's like you had mentioned previously, it's a kind of ear training into itself. But another thing that they had done is their director actually was able to make electronic MIDI sort of renditions of their pieces so that they could, as you do listening to it while you're driving to work or wherever, and you're getting used to hearing those intervals and what they should sound like. I was wondering about performance or rehearsal techniques that you have used to get these things in your ear. We were just talking about your previous roommate, and you basically just got all of these training exercises for free and for fun. Um, have you done any
Thanks,
other?
Austin.
Yeah. Have you done any other similar things?
Yeah, so I've done a bunch of different kinds of ear training, tried a bunch of different techniques. So yeah, I mean, so violin or string instruments in general, we have the advantage of being able to play two notes at once, totally sustained, which singers would have to put on a drone somewhere and then sing over that. Unless you're like Layla Hathaway and you can do multiphonics on like really
What?
controlled multiphonics. But
Yeah.
I think even probably Layla Hathaway would have a hard time doing like super microtonally specific multiphonics. Maybe not. I don't know.
We'll just have to find out
We'll
someday.
have to find out. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I have made MIDI mock-ups for certain things. And I think that's especially for melodic contour, that can be super helpful for me. Just hearing like what the interval sounds like melodically versus harmonically between two pitches that are like both altered, especially that can be super helpful. And we did that actually. Talk. We're working with Eric Wubbles on a new piece, which is going to be completed, and we're performing the full thing in May. It's like, I think it's going to be like 40 or 50 minutes. It's a pretty big thing. And there's five main movements. One that kind of highlights each member of Talk as a soloist in the ensemble. And our singer, by the way, is Charlotte Mundy, who's in Ekmelis. So little.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we just recorded in December the violin movement, which is called Bread, because I was very into bread baking for a while.
Nice.
And I'm still into bread baking. I just haven't done it in a while. But yeah, in Bread, there are a few passages that are kind of like plain chant, but we're all playing in unison, and it's like a super microtonally altered melodic passage that we have to do in complete unison. It's just very, very hard, and that happens like 3 times in the piece, and it's gnarly. And it's especially the instrumentation is violin, voice, flute, clarinet, and percussion. The percussionist is not, luckily, well, I don't know how he doesn't have, he's all fixed pitch instruments, so he's doing some other stuff. He's like playing on a mixing bowl and doing a little nice mixing bowl tremolo while we're doing this passage. It's very ethereal sounding. But yeah, so we did end up making MIDI mock-ups for just like getting those melodies in our ears. And I've done that a few times. Yeah, I mean, I also just practice with a tuner a lot for that kind of stuff. Like I have a tuner that it actually, when you play in tune, so I'm doing scare quotes, in tune, when you play like diatonic half step intervals in equal temperament, it gives you a smiley face. And then when you play out of tune, scare quotes, it it gives you this like purple face that's like really confused. But it also tells you the exact sense deviation. But so we're just sitting like the whole time just practicing with the tuner and getting like purple face the whole time. Just like confused emoji.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, that's called the tonal energy tuner if anyone wants a fun tuning app. I like the smiley faces. It really makes it much more fun.
I'm downloading it immediately.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I mean I think just getting it in your ear however it makes sense. I like to hear things in relationship to a fundamental. So, like in my second quartet that I was talking about that has all these really high partials, it's actually only in four sections. It's like the piece can go anywhere from like, I don't know, 12 to 20 minutes or something. It's very open in that way, but the pitch material for each section is entirely, all of it is derived from the same fundamental. They're just very low fundamentals, but you can kind of like, if you practice with that pitch as a low drone, then you can kind of hear like, I think it helps to like try to hear how each of these overtones kind of sinks into that fundamental. I definitely think that I have started playing way more in tune in general since I started doing this kind of ear training, especially even on, more equal tempered or like, or I guess traditional kind of Western classical tuning, just because, you just get better at listening for these slight deviations, these slight differences in pitch. I think that all performers should do this kind of ear training at some point in conservatory training. It's just super helpful.
Absolutely. It's like I'm in a music of the Middle East class right now, and so we're going over modes with half step intervals, and we'll have days where everybody brings their instruments into class, and just trying to get everybody to center in on E half flat is really challenging.
Like quarter tones,
Yeah, exactly. And so those kind of relationships are really cool. But then you go back and it affects how you play your Schubert. And you're listening for different things, and that development for each individual musician is really cool.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think just like all of it is ear training. Like anything where you're getting more sensitive to pitch and specificity of pitch, it all just like translates to any other kind of music that you're playing. Just to be more aware of that and be able to make interpretive choices. Even if you're deciding like, oh, I actually want this to be this is the seventh, this is a minor seventh above this other note, so I want it to be like a little bit lower just because it sounds more pure or whatever, just to be able to make those kinds of decisions. It can be really beneficial for like just any kind of musical practice.
Absolutely.
Unless you play the piano, which you're stuck with it.
I'm stuck with however it's been tuned.
Which
is why you go to electronic pianos where you can go in and whatever DAW you're using to change up your tuning. It's great.
Yeah. Well, Eric does that. Eric Webbles, he has that was one of the ways that he was, because we had a talk at a workshop residency with him, and he would just sustain chords that, this is the kind of sonority that everything is fitting into. And he would he would just tune them on his little MIDI keyboard, and it was great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it sounds like with these harmonics and microtones, there's a lot of technique that comes in both like composition and in the performing of them, and also just by the virtue of the artistic experience and you writing a piece about bread. It sounds like there's a lot of expression that also comes with it. So a question I have is, how do you balance intellect and emotion in your craft?
Yeah. Well, bread is Eric's piece. I want to make clear that's I didn't write bread. I wish I'd written bread because it's so dang good. But alas. It's a good question, and I think I have a tendency to be a very like I really like logic. I I get very interested in like systems and creating systems and but then at the same time, as I was saying earlier, like for me, the thing that I really love about playing violin and about performing in general is the catharsis of, just like fully being in something and like being so focused on something that like your whole body's in it, and like yeah, just this kind of state of flow that you can get in when you're performing. And it's really important to me when I'm composing to create situations where people can achieve that kind of flow. And I think it's definitely possible to embody very complex music and get to that same kind of state. But in my own compositional practice, I tend to have systems that are behind the scenes that are I'm like thinking very heavily about, or very kind of meticulously about like the way that things are constructed, but then I just let that go. Like I don't want people to be thinking about that most of the time. My first string quartet is a little different. My first string quartet, which is actually on the new Rhythm Method album that's coming out, is called An Alien with Extraordinary Abilities. Um, and that piece is much more rigid in certain ways. It's very like there's a whole extended section that's very metrically precise. It's kind of like the gears of a clock turning at like different speeds. It's all just kind of like basically a big mensuration canon. But then even that piece has like a huge amount of kind of aleatory or like chance elements or space for the performer to assert agency, in the timing and in this. I have a lot of like boxed material where people can choose kind of how they want to interpret different pitches within a box, and a lot of transitions between sections that are just like get from point A to point B, and I'm not going to tell you how to get there. um so yeah, even that piece, which is probably one of the more rigid pieces that I've written in recent years, and that's not even that recent anymore. I think I wrote that piece in 2016. Yeah, since then I don't I don't write a lot of I don't write a lot of rhythms anymore. I write a lot of like graphically spaced note heads and yeah, graphics and yeah, I text instructions and things. I mean, I definitely do still have some pieces that are like a little more complex in their notation, but I tend to keep the complexity for like myself, and then whatever makes it onto the page has become like less and less complex. Or I guess I'm searching for complexity through other means. Like I want the complexity to come through. I don't want it to be laborious in the way that it's generated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I'm intrigued by how you mentioned logic and how that fits into your composing. Like at least for me, logic is one of those weird things with music where it's you study this one language or this one composer and you think you got it, and then you hear this other piece and it completely disorients your sense of logic that you've had for music. Have you had any pieces or experiences that have disoriented your sense of musical logic like that?
Oh, wow. I know what you're talking about, and I'm trying to think. You know, yeah, I played so just the first thing that comes to mind, because I definitely I feel like I get that all the time. I played a piece in November by Lisa Lim called Extinction Events and Dawn Chorus.
Wonderful piece.
Wonderful piece. It's like this huge 40-minute or something, very theatrical piece. The violin part is like so good. I start off stage and then like drag a gigantic train of cellophane behind me, like plastic wrap behind me. I like drag it through the audience onto the stage, and then we all like pass it around, and it's like but the way that piece is constructed, yeah, I mean, there's something about it. It's in these different kind of sections, these different movements, and I don't know, uh, there one of the movements in particular, it's like a duo with the violinist and the percussionist, and we're like having this conversation where the violinist will play something and like sounds like you're practicing. You're supposed to like sound like you're checking the tuning, but the tuning is actually not open strings. You're just like playing these chords that sound like you're tuning your open strings, and then you play these melodies, and then the percussionist tries to imitate it on like it's basically like a piece of string attached to a drum head that he's bowing with like one of those ribbed drumsticks, and it's like a proto violin or something. It's like this kind of it's not a violin, but it's like he's trying to make it a violin. It's like it seems like it should work. And this kind of conversation that the two instruments have, and just having that, I mean, that movement on its own is really fascinating to me, but then having that in the context of this like gigantic piece, and yeah, that it just kind of, it's like, oh, that you can just do that and it works. Yeah, that just worked really well. I don't know, I mean, it's like, oh yeah, this is a huge ensemble piece, and then like all of a sudden like the violinist and the percussionist walk to the front of the stage and turn a little lamp on and like have a conversation that is like, it doesn't go great, but it goes okay by the end. They're kind of like in sync, like they're trying to understand each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that was kind of, I really enjoyed playing that piece. One of my favorite things I've played recently.
Awesome.
That's so fun just to hear about. I have listening to do now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
It's a good one. We did it at the in Switzerland at the Forward Festival. Lucerne Forward Festival.
What, were you the one who played in the violin percussion duet?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just one violin in the whole piece. So the whole ensemble is just one violin. So I got lucky that I got that part.
Nice.
I didn't know how hard it was going to be before I didn't get the music until like a month before, and I was like, I guess I have work to do.
Oh goodness.
That happened.
But I think it went well. Yeah.
Excellent.
It's been fascinating to hear about improvisation in your work, and sort of how that affects your composing, or what you compose, and then how you perform it. Recently at BGSU, there was a guest musician, Dr. Mark Lomax II. He is known as a jazz drummer, and he's also a composer. And he had a fantastic concert here, and they did a little Q&A afterwards, and I got to ask him about navigating the seemingly, I guess, double life between being a composer and a performer. How do those intersect? How do they inform each other? And the answer he gave me was really interesting. He was like, they're not different things. They're on a spectrum. They're one and the same thing, really. And when you explore a territory like improvisation, which is sometimes called composing on the spot, that blends those three things together into a spectrum, into a continuum. I was interested just to hear your thoughts about the connectedness between these three areas, and yeah, how they interrelate for you.
For sure. I mean, composition and improvisation, yeah, they're the only difference. I mean, I don't know. It's hard once you start breaking it down, it's hard to find where the difference is, because you could say, oh, well,
Yeah.
composition, there's a score, but it's like, does there have to be? And does the score have to be notes on a page, or can it be instructions? Can they be delivered orally? Is a jazz standard a composition? You have like you have the head that you can read, but it's like, that's not enough. The composition comes in the improvisation and the orchestration and the like what the improvisation that happens. And it's like what yeah it's it, in the end I think it yeah what he said sounds right to me, that there's this kind of a spectrum, but I'm not even sure what the spectrum is. I don't think it's like a linear spectrum. I think there's
Maybe it's
like
circular
yeah, or like
or triangular.
metadimensional, or like I multidimensional. I think it's like you know
It,
yeah
it's like one of those radars where it's like you can have some of this and then some of that, or in a different context you have just a little bit of this and a lot of this down here.
sure yeah, and it's like all of the labels, they can be like nice shorthand to put so you don't have to like explain for 20 minutes like what you're interested in doing, or like the range of your you know of your practice as your musical practice. But yeah, in the end it's like I don't know. And then yeah, like composition also, like the word composition bears like this kind of connotation of like institutionalized and kind of traditional, um in a kind of classical, Western classical tradition. This kind of when people call themselves composers, a lot of the time that's kind of the connotation. I think that's less and less in recent years. I've been noticing just kind of like a lot more discourse about what it means to be a composer, and who feels like that's a word that they want to use for themselves. And I hear some people call themselves like generative artists, and I'm kind of drawn to that as well. Sometimes I call myself a generative artist. But it's all kind of in the same universe.
Yeah. I was just thinking now about like music, we call it like a four-dimensional art because it takes place over time.
Mm-hmm.
But another aspect of that is what musical considerations are decided upon for any one event. Like you were saying, with a jazz tune, it can have so many different forms between performances and what instruments are playing, and then, or like if you're writing a piece that is aleatoric and having different performances able to be vastly different depending on what decisions are made when along the course. That was really fascinating to think about.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, even if you take 10 people interpreting the same Bach sonata, it's like none of them will be the same. Or I recently, this was in like September, I played a concert with this violinist, Patricia Kopachinskaya, who is just like, if you don't know her, go check her out. She's a total, just like maniac in the best of ways. I'm like, I love her. But she's, she played Beethoven Concerto, and it was just like, the program was called Bye Bye Beethoven, which is a very like, I feel like Europeans always need to have titles like that on concerts. But like it has to be in English, and it has to be like kind of a little catchy or cheesy. Bye Bye Beethoven. But the program ended with, she played the Beethoven Concerto and Violin Concerto, and just even from the very beginning, even just starting it off, it was like I had never heard the piece played that way. But it was also like, why not? Like, yeah, okay. I mean, she just takes like so much rubato, so much kind of like wild dynamic and timbral contrasts, and like, but she's a real like, it's coming from a really like genuine place. This is how she hears the music, and it's like people, if she played that for a jury in undergrad conservatory, they'd probably be like, you'll never win a competition doing this, which is probably true. But that's not really a good metric for like deciding if something's a good performance. And even if you look at only the competition winners, like even those people are going to have, who are like all playing within a very tight box. Like if you analyze what they're doing, they have different timing and different sections. They have different there's dynamics and different kind of phrasing, and there's so much of interpretation and performance that is not on the page. So unless you're writing fixed media pieces, like there's going to be like that's the continuum, is like whether it's fixed media or is it like entirely off the cuff improvised. But it's like you can really find things along that whole continuum of like how much was decided before how much is predetermined, I guess. Because it's not like in that Beethoven performance, like it was a little different every time she was playing with it, and it was living and breathing, but it was in general the timing was about the same. She had made those decisions, but that's not something that Beethoven decided. But Beethoven didn't decide very much at all. I mean, I guess he decided a lot. He decided the notes and the rhythms and some basic dynamics, which is a lot. He did a great job. I'm not trying to hate on Beethoven Violin Concerto. It's a lovely piece. Beethoven was a good composer. But like, I think. but yeah, there's even when we're talking about kind of like the more rigid compositional practices, such as like Western classical music, there's still so much space.
That's good to keep oneself open in that way.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one other question. It's about your experience with the ensembles that you were a founding member of. How have your experiences with the Rhythm Method String Quartet and the Talk Ensemble informed your composing and even your performing, just in general, your artistic craft?
I mean, I owe like a huge part of who I am, both like musically and professionally and personally, and in basically every way, to my ensemble mates in those two groups. I've been playing with Talk was founded in 2013 spring, I believe, and Rhythm Method was founded in 2014 spring. So I've been playing with those two groups for 10 years almost. Not quite, but getting up there. We're gonna be there soon with Talk. We're like, it's crazy to think about. We're at like 9 years, and that time, I was, I guess in 2013, I was 22 or something. Is that right? Yeah, I was born 23. So yeah, but it's a really kind of formative time. And I mean, so the first piece that I ever had performed was this multi-movement piece for violin and untrained vocalists plus Charlotte. I wrote it for Talk, but I didn't feel like I didn't yet want to write for like flute, clarinet, and percussion. I was like, I'm gonna do violin and voice because those are the things that I can do, and I can make sure that everything works. And yeah, so yeah, they still give me every once in a while they'll give me crap about that piece, because there was this one thing that I asked them to do, which is the sound that's like I don't know, it's like in the back of the throat, but you have to like say a syllable while you do it. So like if I want to say dreaming, I'd be like dreaming. And they had a really hard time with that. So every once in a while I'll be like, they'll like quote that piece at me. Yeah, so I mean that was really amazing to just be like, hey, I have these friends who will do this for me, even though I'm like, I don't have any accolades. Like I don't have any, like I've never written music before, and I'm just asking these friends of mine who are just like amazing musicians to do this, and just like they did it, and it was really amazing to just be able to hear something that I wrote performed by other people. And since I also wrote a piece for me and Charlotte, the vocalist, that called The Master of Such Moments. That was, that was also a really big piece for me to have that opportunity, just working with Charlotte. She's amazing, and just like being able to work with people who are so, skilled. And then, the rhythm method has been probably the most influential group of people who have helped me as a composer, because that's a huge part of our group identity. It's become, over the years, that's become a huge part of our identity. I've written 3 quartets for them, for us. And, we've all played a ton of each other's music. And just and I've also written a duo for me and Megan, and a duo for me and Leah. So, just like having the opportunity I should write a duo for me and Carrie, just to round
Complete
it
the set. Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. But, that, like, having that kind of a collaborative space has been so helpful. And yeah, I mean, we just have this agreement that we've spoken about, which is basically like, anytime you want to write a piece for the group, we'll play it. Like, if somebody in the group wants to write something, like, we're gonna figure out a time to make it happen. And sometimes we'll go for a while and be like, we haven't had any new pieces by us for a while. Let's set a concert in 6 months, and we're all gonna have new pieces for that, and that's just like, that's what happened in September. We were just like, we should do some new pieces. And I hadn't written for a while at that point. Well, kind of. My second quartet was in we premiered it in, like, right before the pandemic. It was March 2020, early March, or mid. It was like the last day that you could conceivably have a concert without people thinking you're, like, absolutely a horrible person. Like, yeah. And then I wrote a piano piece for a friend of mine, a prepared piano piece for a friend of mine in the next April, but then I hadn't written anything else until that quartet.
So it sounds like the ensembles give you a pretty vivid sense of a community in music.
I mean, I mostly write for the rhythm method. These days, I also, I've written a bit for talk and talk subsets. I've written, like this piece for my friend, Shion Costello. That was the prepared piano piece last year, and I'm actually working now on a piece for Gabby Vanek and Will Yeager, this bassoon and bass duo. And they're not, they're buddies, and they played on the open improvisations series that I ran online. This was like over the pandemic, for the first year, we'd had this kind of weekly improv hang that turned into like a very big, it kind of blew up. And I saw Will and Gabby play on that, and I was just like, y'all are good. Can I write something? Like, is that a thing? Do people write bass and bassoon duos ever? And they're like, not enough people. Would you like to? And then finally we started making some moves on that. So, like, I write for other people sometimes, but I very rarely am not involved in the premiere of a piece that I write. And part of that is just because I think a big part of my practice is, like, finding sounds together and kind of workshopping things as we go. And I try to have that reflected in my scores so that other people can play them later without, like, needing that kind of communication. But I also honestly, like, I like to communicate with people who are playing my music. Like, I like to have that kind of like open space to create something together and more collaboratively. so that it feels like whoever is playing it, it's like they have ownership of it. It's like as much their piece as mine, you know.
Mm-hmm. Our friends make this tiny little music world go round, because the music world is so small.
Mm-hmm. It's very true. Yeah, friends are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Marina,
Thank
for
you so
joining us
much for
on the
joining us.
podcast.
Sure thing. Yeah, I
This
hope
was
I wasn't too
delightful.
rambly.
Oh, no,
No,
no, no,
this is
no.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah,
Cool.
awesome stuff. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next Praecepta Podcast, which is coming sooner than you expect. We will catch you all there later. Bye, everybody.